Humanity was never prepared. From the sky, portals opened, unleashing creatures thirsty for destruction. Amidst the massacre, a boy watched as his guardian was brutally crushed. Her lifeless body fell before him, blood painting the ground. Frozen in fear, he couldn't move. He could only watch helplessly as his friend was about to be devoured. And then, the monster grabbed him. The end seemed inevitable. But before his bones could be shattered, a blade cut through the air. In an instant, the monster was sliced apart, and a hero stood before him. Strong, unwavering, a true savior. That day the boy cried, not just in relief, but with a burning desire. A desire to become strong, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Years passed. He trained, he fought, he survived. But when the moment came to be the hero, he failed. Against an unbeatable enemy, he realized he was still too weak, that all his effort was not enough. Now on the brink of death, only one thought remains. If only I could turn back time.
But before we dive into the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep bringing you more content like this. Already subscribed? All right, let's get into the video.
The sun had risen high in the sky, casting light over the battlefield littered with countless dragon corpses. Among them, one man sat atop the head of a slain dragon, the very warrior who had single-handedly brought them all down with his sword. A system message appeared before him, confirming that he had successfully cleared the ancient dragon's nest. Yet, despite this monumental achievement, he felt no joy. Shin Sang-yoon, the swordsman responsible for this victory, had nearly reached 60 years of age. This year he had turned 55, marking 3 decades since he first took up the sword. He leaped down from the dragon's head, reflecting on his long journey. Despite dedicating his life to the blade, his greatest accomplishment had merely placed him within the top 100 swordsmen in the country. His gaze shifted to his reward, a skill book granted for clearing the dungeon. Without hesitation, he prepared to consume the artifact, only for a sudden blue light to manifest behind him. A powerful being had arrived. It was a constellation known as Bloomer Model Student, a celestial entity believed to originate from India. The constellation spoke in Sanskrit, greeting Shin and offering him a blessing. Shin expressed his gratitude, deeply appreciative of the constellation's support from the time he was nothing more than a third-rate swordsman. However, the blessing carried an overwhelming condition. Shin needed to reach level 850 to activate the first effect, which would double the stats from his artifacts and titles. The second blessing, even more unattainable, required level 900, at which point his stats would be tripled. Yet, despite all the grueling effort he had poured into his life, he had only managed to reach level 650. The sheer impossibility of these conditions meant he had never been able to reap the true benefits of his constellation's support. The celestial being urged him to consume the skill book, prompting him to recall his first awakening. His initial skill had been Artifact Devourer, but mastering it had proven to be a 30-year struggle. In the beginning he had experimented with boiling and consuming artifacts, but the method had yielded no results. Frying them had similarly failed. It was only after 3 decades that he discovered the proper technique, mana synchronization. However, even this approach was limited, only working on artifacts that were compatible with him. With this knowledge in mind, he activated his skill on the newly acquired book, but disappointment struck once more. The book was unsuitable for him. Frustrated, he discarded it without hesitation. His constellation watched in surprise, admitting that very little information existed about the Artifact Devourer skill and apologizing for the lack of guidance. The celestial being suggested that, given the time available, Shin should attempt the mana synchronization process again. Overcome with emotion, Shin began to cry. He no longer had time. He was nearing 60, and the weight of his unfulfilled aspirations crushed him. His constellation Dino apologized once more, but Shin did not blame him. It was not anyone's fault. His life had simply been filled with regret. He could never forget the person who had once saved him from a monster. He had devoted himself to becoming like that hero, yet now he was old, exhausted, and powerless. If only he had been younger. Dino smiled at his words, though Shin, lost in his thoughts, failed to notice. The celestial being quietly activated an unknown power, something beyond Shin's understanding. Before he could comprehend what was happening, his vision blurred. The last thing he saw was the final memory of his 55-year-old self. A shift occurred. Time rewound. Shin Sang-yoon had regressed. The next moment, a news broadcast played before him. A reporter was explaining the existence of dungeons and gates, directing questions to a woman standing in front of him. Shin was not physically present at the scene. He was watching everything unfold from his own home, through a television screen. 4 days had passed since his return to the past. To be exact, he had traveled back 30 years. When he had awakened, he had found himself in his old apartment. His body was that of his 25-year-old self, yet his mind carried the accumulated memories of his previous life. Confusion set in. To ground himself, he reached for his dagger, swinging it experimentally. It was a bronze-level weapon. Its name was Venomoth. Despite its low level, he recognized the dagger's hidden potential. Without hesitation, he activated his skill, beginning the absorption process. Due to the weapon's low-tier nature, the absorption rate was only 10%, but the true value lay in the hidden skill it contained. To consume the artifact, he entered an isolated space known as the Gap of Unconsciousness. This was a dimension he had to pass through each time he devoured an artifact, and the experience always left him anxious. Before him, a dish appeared. This time, it was a roasted barbecue chicken drizzled with olive oil. He sighed in relief. It was a normal meal. In his previous life, he had been forced to consume dishes made from centipedes. Taking the first bite, he initiated the dagger's absorption. The process granted him 2 permanent agility stat points along with a hidden skill called Demon Bash. As the dagger's power was transferred to him, its physical form gradually faded away. Once the absorption was complete, it vanished entirely. Satisfied with the results, he returned home and collapsed onto the sofa. He had successfully obtained a valuable skill just as planned. Now it was time to test it. Determined to gauge its effectiveness, he decided to enter a dungeon. A massive gate loomed ahead. In front of it, players and porters had already gathered. Among them, a man approached the team leader. He was the leader of the porter team. With a concerned expression, he informed the leader that one of his members had withdrawn from the expedition, Shin Sang-yoon. The team leader, unfazed, explained that Shin had joined the player team instead. The porter leader was taken aback. Shin Sang-yoon, who had only awakened 4 days ago, was now a player. It was unheard of for someone to be allowed into a dungeon raid without completing the player academy. Despite this, the team leader had given his approval. The porter leader objected, pointing out that adding an untrained individual to a player team was unprecedented. But the team leader reassured him, instructing him not to worry about contribution points or the distribution system. With no choice, the porter leader left. One of the players questioned the decision. Why had Shin been accepted into the team? The leader smirked, stating that if Shin died, the porters would finally learn to respect players more and keep their mouths shut. Shin then approached the leader and greeted him. From this moment on, he would be working as a player. The porters regarded him with cold, disdainful stares, while the players welcomed him with smug smiles. Their expressions were completely unguarded, just as he had expected. The leader officially welcomed him to the team, noting that he had assumed Shin would be late to his first gate. As Shin prepared himself, he glanced at his weapon, a long sword. When asked about his choice, he explained that he had studied the weapon by watching online videos. The leader scoffed. The long sword was the most difficult weapon to wield among swords. It would be no easy task for Shin to handle. But Shin simply responded that, at the very least, he would be able to protect his own life. With that, the raid began. One by one, the players and porters stepped through the gate. The leader, watching Shin, found his arrogance amusing. The idea of learning about dungeons from the internet was laughable. Shin had become a player just 4 days ago, and yet he thought he was ready for this. The dungeon they were entering was an orc stronghold, known to be particularly difficult for beginners. The leader was certain that Shin would quickly realize his limits. But as they entered, something completely unexpected unfolded. The leader had assumed Shin would die. Instead, he watched in disbelief as Shin charged to the front lines, cutting down every orc monster before anyone else had the chance to react. The entire team stood frozen, confused by what they had just witnessed. Who was this man? What had they just seen? Shin stood alone, his sword gripped tightly in his hand. Surrounding him were the lifeless corpses of every orc that had once occupied the battlefield. Orcs were monsters commonly found in games, novels, and fantasy movies. Their frequent appearances had shaped perceptions, leading many to view them as weak creatures. Compared to dragons and other formidable monsters, they were often seen as simple-minded brutes, relying solely on violence and lacking intelligence. Because of this reputation, many new and overconfident players would recklessly engage them without much thought. Orcs had straightforward traits. Their greatest strength lay in their raw power without any special tricks or tactics. On average, they stood at 250 centimeters tall and weighed around 180 kilograms. This immense physicality created a massive disparity in power between them and humans, making survival nearly impossible for those who underestimated them. For this reason, orcs had earned the nickname the Wall of Newbies. Before Shin encountered the orcs, the party moved cautiously through the dungeon's passageways. One of the players warned him that as a newcomer, he would receive no special treatment and was entirely on his own. The porter leader was visibly displeased with Shin's presence, believing that he had become arrogant despite having awakened only recently. To him, Shin's promotion to player status had come too soon. Shin, however, responded that he would do his best to assist the team, understanding that no one would show kindness to a new player. The player did not take his words well, insisting that effort alone was meaningless unless he could actually prove himself through action. Rather than argue, Shin simply smiled and remained silent. He then asked if he could take the front lines in battle should they encounter monsters. His question was met with disbelief. The player he had been speaking to turned to him in shock, questioning his sanity. Before he could even finish his sentence, an orc suddenly appeared behind them. Shin placed his hand on his sword, ready to engage. The player immediately rushed forward, blocking the orc's path. He shouted at Shin, demanding to know if he had lost his mind. With his slow movements, how could he possibly wield such a heavy weapon effectively? Shin reassured him that there was no need for concern, but as the two argued, the orc seized the opportunity to attack. Its axe swung toward the player, who believed for a moment that death was imminent. Before the blow could land, the leader intervened, using his shield to deflect the attack and push the orc back. The monster stumbled to the ground. The leader quickly ordered them to stop fighting among themselves and focus on the enemy. The other players praised his quick reflexes in handling the monster. Taking command, he instructed them to remain behind him, as he intended to take on the orc alone. As expected, the orc fought in a straightforward manner, launching a direct charge. The leader met the attack with his shield, blocking the force before retaliating with his sword. His blade struck the orc's chest. For a moment, he believed the battle was over, but the orc grinned and immediately swung its axe in retaliation. The leader narrowly dodged the counterattack. Shin observed the fight closely. Despite being the strongest member of the group, the leader was only a level 50 player. He struggled to land any critical hits on the monster. Realizing that the battle needed to end, the leader poured all of his remaining strength into one final strike, aiming for the orc's heart. The blow connected and the orc collapsed lifeless. The other players were astonished by his ability to kill the creature alone. As he turned around, satisfied with his victory, a sudden, thunderous sound filled the air. From the depths of the dungeon, 6 more orcs emerged. However, these were not ordinary orcs. They were high orcs, with one among them clad in armor. Panic spread through the group. Unlike standard orcs, high orcs were significantly stronger and far more dangerous. Knowing he could handle a single normal orc but not an entire group of high orcs, the leader quickly decided to retreat. Before anyone could act, Shin stepped forward. He intended to fight them alone. The players stared at him in disbelief. Even they could barely manage a battle against such monsters. The leader urgently warned him not to do anything reckless, reminding him that he had only just awakened. But Shin ignored the warning, charging forward without hesitation. In an instant, he reached the first orc and, with a single swing of his long sword, cut the creature clean in half. The entire team stood frozen in shock. None of them could comprehend what had just happened. At level 1, Shin should not have been capable of executing such a flawless kill. The remaining orcs, enraged at their fallen comrade, roared in fury. Without hesitation, they rushed toward Shin at full speed, determined to tear him apart. Even though Shin was still only level 1, he possessed considerable experience from his past life. He attacked 3 orcs in rapid succession, striking their weak points with precision and eliminating all 3 in a single swing. Another orc lunged at him, aiming for his head with a powerful axe strike. Shin narrowly evaded the attack, maintaining only the smallest gap between them, and retaliated instantly. His sword cleaved through the orc's skull, splitting it in 2. Pulling back, Shin set his sights on the last remaining enemy, the armored orc. The monster wasted no time and swung its massive sword with overwhelming force. The sheer power of the strike devastated the surrounding area. Shin swiftly dodged and countered, targeting the orc's neck. However, the cut was too shallow to be fatal. The armored orc turned, swinging its sword directly at Shin's neck. Just as the blade was about to land, the attack abruptly stopped in midair. The orc stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. Shin had activated Demon Bash. Any opponent wounded by this skill was immobilized for 2 seconds. Seizing the opportunity, Shin executed a clean decapitation, sending the orc's severed head tumbling forward. It landed right in front of his party members. Everyone stood in shock. Shin had single-handedly slain all of the monsters, now standing amidst their fallen corpses. It had only been 3 days since his awakening, yet his skill was undeniable. They immediately recognized that he had used an ultra-short hindrance skill. Even among renowned players, the best recorded duration for such a skill was only 1.5 seconds, yet Shin's had lasted even longer. His proficiency with the greatsword was far beyond what they had expected. The leader was particularly astonished. Not only had the skill worked against an armored orc, but it had been executed flawlessly. The thought lingered in his mind: Shin had only awakened a few days ago, so where had he obtained such a powerful skill? With the battle over, Shin leveled up. He received the F-rank title Fearless Immature Puppy, which increased his evasion stat by 10 points. Along with this, he gained 1 free stat point. Without hesitation, he allocated it to luck. In his past life, he had learned the importance of this far too late. Luck was directly tied to skill accuracy and artifact drop rates. As Shin made his decision, the leader cautiously approached him. He questioned whether Shin was truly Shin Sang-yoon and demanded an explanation about the skill he had just used. A hindrance ability of that caliber was unheard of. Since Shin could not reveal his regression, he claimed it was simply his awakening skill. The leader, unconvinced, raised his voice in disbelief. Awakening such a skill was impossible. He pressed further, asking whether Shin had stumbled upon an absurdly rare diamond rank artifact, or perhaps something even greater. Shin calmly suggested that he check the weapon himself. The leader examined the greatsword's details, only to find that it was an ordinary blade. There was no sign of an artifact bestowing the skill. That meant Demon Bash was purely Shin's own ability. The realization hit hard. The leader had spent 2 years venturing into dungeons, reaching level 50, yet he had never acquired a skill as effective as that. Before he could dwell on it further, a voice suddenly rang out. One of the players had spotted the middle boss. The group turned their attention toward their leader, awaiting instructions. Though still unsettled by Shin's talent, the leader gave the order to move forward. As the party pressed ahead, he took a moment to acknowledge Shin's efforts. He thanked him for dealing with the minions but warned him that his skill would not work against the middle boss. Shin smiled. In all the excitement, he had almost forgotten why he had joined this party in the first place. He made a proposition to the leader. If he defeated the middle boss by himself, could he claim its artifacts as his own? That was, after all, the rightful reward for delivering the final blow. This party compensated its members based on their contributions. If Shin could take down the boss, the spoils would be his. The Crimson Stone was an artifact that could only be obtained by defeating demon orcs. However, even after slaying hundreds of them, acquiring it was known to be incredibly difficult. The drop rate was so low that obtaining it was almost considered a miracle. In Shin's past life, after his team had failed to defeat a demon orc, he had witnessed another group emerge victorious and claim the Crimson Stone for themselves. Their captain had been praised for securing such a rare artifact. Shin had observed their conversation, listening to them discuss how their leader had managed to obtain it. That artifact possessed the only known skill capable of delaying an enemy's actions. He had heard about it back then, but now, in this life, he needed that skill for himself in order to grow stronger. As the team prepared to enter the dungeon, Shin made his offer. If he defeated the boss alone, he would take the artifacts as his reward. His words were met with silence. The leader gave no immediate response. The importance of obtaining the delay skill for future battles was undeniable. However, most players would dismiss such a proposal as nothing more than arrogance from a reckless newcomer. No one took his claim seriously. The other players stepped forward, cursing at Shin for his audacity. They mocked him, telling him not to get ahead of himself just because he had managed to take down some ordinary orcs. Then, unexpectedly, the captain addressed him. To the surprise of the entire team, he allowed Shin to do as he pleased, but only if they failed to defeat the boss themselves. If they were unsuccessful, Shin would then be free to enter the dungeon alone and face the monster. Hearing this, Shin could not hide his excitement. Convincing the leader had been easier than expected. It meant the captain was already considering stepping back from this battle. Without wasting any more time, the leader turned and walked toward the boss room. The players rushed after him. As he reached the door, he reminded himself that their objective was to clear the dungeon, proving that Shin's ability was nothing more than a single broken skill. Placing his hand on the massive door, he slowly pushed it open. A chilling air rushed out from within. Though the door had barely been opened, the boss monster was already waiting, standing motionless and staring at them. As the team entered, torches along the walls flickered to life, illuminating the massive chamber. At the center stood the middle boss, the bloodthirsty demon orc. Immediately, the players took their positions, preparing for battle. The leader assessed the situation. Despite its intimidating presence, he had heard that this particular demon orc was relatively easy to defeat. Confident in their strategy, he ordered his team to surround the monster and attack from behind. With a smirk, he reassured himself that there was no chance for Shin to take on the boss alone. If things went according to plan, Shin would not even get the opportunity to fight. As soon as he gave the command, the team rushed forward, the leader leading the charge. But in an instant, everything fell apart. The leader suddenly found himself on the ground, blood trickling from his head. He struggled to get up, disoriented, questioning what had just happened. Shin had been watching from the sidelines. He had felt a sense of concern when the group rushed in, but he had never expected them to blindly charge at the monster. This was exactly why they had failed in his past life. One of the players helped the leader to his feet as the bloodthirsty demon orc loomed over them, unfazed. Recognizing the situation, Shin advised the leader to retreat and return another time. The leader, exhausted and shaken, realized the truth: this enemy was far stronger than he had anticipated. He could not understand why both the high orc they had fought earlier and this demon orc were so overwhelmingly powerful. The information he had received from the market had been completely misleading. With no other option, he ordered a retreat. The raid was over. They would regroup and try again the next day. As they withdrew, the leader turned his gaze toward Shin. Shin smiled. This was his moment. His turn to fight. The leader approached him, giving him permission to face the monster alone. However, before stepping back, he issued a warning. If Shin died in this battle, he should not hold any resentment toward him. Shin tightened his grip around his sword, responding with unwavering confidence. There was no need for concern. He had no intention of dying today. The demon orc closed the distance in an instant, preparing to strike. By all logic, comparing their stats alone, Shin had no chance of winning. But stats were not everything. With all the experience he had accumulated from his past life, this battle was his to win. Shin effortlessly deflected the orc's attack with his greatsword. The monster hesitated, clearly confused, as it had never encountered such resistance before. From a distance, the leader observed the scene, watching in disbelief as Shin stood firm after parrying the strike. His hand remained slightly raised from the impact, yet he showed no signs of struggle. Moving slowly toward the monster, Shin's gaze locked onto the crimson stone embedded in its chest. His obsession with that artifact stemmed from the special effect it possessed. The combination of the delay skill and his own skill, Demon Bash, would create an overwhelming advantage. With his ability, Devour Artifacts, he could merge the effects of different skills, and an idea had formed in his mind. If there was a way to stack the stun effects of Demon Bash, he could achieve an infinite stun loop. Acquiring the delay skill would make this possible. The monster and Shin locked eyes once again before the orc lunged forward with another attack. Shin struck with precision, targeting a weak point, forcing the monster to drop its massive axe. Without hesitation, he activated Demon Bash. The orc froze in place, unable to move. The leader, still watching, struggled to comprehend what he had just witnessed. Shin's skill was effective even against a boss monster. For Shin, this result was both expected and surprising. He had not anticipated his stun to work so well. However, before he could act, the orc suddenly retaliated, swinging its foot at him. Shin used his sword to block, but the impact sent him skidding backward. He had made a critical oversight. The monster had a self-regeneration ability. The wounds inflicted moments ago had already healed at an alarming speed. To stun it again, he needed to wait another 15 seconds. This was exactly why he required the delay skill. The orc charged forward, closing the gap between them. Shin quickly adjusted his mindset. If stunning it was no longer an option, then he had only one alternative: he had to kill it. Once again, he deflected an incoming strike. The leader continued to observe, trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. The stun skill had clearly stopped working, and the gap in their stats was undeniable. Yet, Shin's expression remained completely composed. The leader questioned everything. How could someone so inexperienced look so confident? Was Shin really just a new player? For Shin, the situation was nothing new. He had faced monsters like this before. The key was to abandon the idea of simply cutting them down. If he was weaker, then his best option was to concentrate his power on a single point. Rather than relying on brute force, he would use the enemy's own strength against it. With that in mind, he shattered the orc's axe, then drove his sword straight into its heart. The monster collapsed lifeless. A notification confirmed his victory. He had leveled up twice from defeating the demon orc. Additionally, he had acquired a new title, Demon Hunter, ranked at E. It was his second title, achieved within a single day. That had to be one of the benefits of playing solo. As the battle concluded, the captain and the other players approached him. Their expressions reflected shock and disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Shin, meeting their gazes, responded with a strange smile. To avoid dealing with unnecessary attention, he quickly devised a solution. He began to act as if the fight had been far more difficult than it appeared. Pretending that the damage inflicted by the captain had weakened him to the point where he nearly died, he let out subtle cues of exhaustion. The players immediately turned to the captain, expressing their gratitude. They praised him, believing his attack had played a crucial role in weakening the orc. The captain, however, was left completely bewildered. He listened to the players' words and then turned to Shin. Their eyes met. Without speaking, Shin silently conveyed his message. He was giving the captain a chance to maintain his honor. The captain then looked toward the Crimson Stone. He understood Shin's unspoken reminder. A promise had been made. Accepting his defeat, the captain ordered the players to prepare for the final boss fight. The team began ascending the stairs, leaving Shin behind. Once alone, Shin took hold of the Crimson Stone. Without hesitation, he started to get ready and begin to consume it. Shin drifted into the gap of unconsciousness, where a dish appeared before him. It was a master chef's bibim naengmyeon, garnished with meat jelly. Fixating on the meal, he prepared himself before taking the first bite. At that moment, the absorption of the Crimson Stone commenced. His strength and health stats increased by 2 points and he gained the skill delay. With this newfound ability, he could incorporate the delay effect into his skills. A sense of nervous anticipation overtook him as he bound the delay skill to Demon Bash. If he used the skill on the same target again, a second stun state was guaranteed. This would, in turn, increase his chances of successfully applying a third and fourth stun, creating a strategic advantage. Regaining consciousness, Shin immediately checked his status window. The concept had once seemed purely theoretical, but now he confirmed its practical application. As he processed this realization, the captain approached him from behind, requesting a conversation. Turning to face him, Shin inquired about the matter. The leader informed him that they had reached the final boss room, where the orc berserker awaited. Shin expressed his intention to join the fight later, but the captain urged him to participate immediately and battle alongside the team. Ready for combat, Shin set his own condition. He wanted the boss's artifacts in return. The captain agreed without hesitation. A player approached them, reporting that the team was prepared to enter the boss room. His expression revealed clear displeasure toward Shin, his gaze filled with anger. Shin noticed but failed to understand the reason behind it. As the captain and the team moved toward the entrance, Shin pondered the players' hostility. Standing before the final chamber, they beheld the imposing figure of the berserker orc. Keeping a safe distance from the monster, the captain instructed Shin to follow closely during the assault. Shin, gripping his sword, countered by telling the captain to stay near him instead. Some team members assured him that he didn't have to fight alone, but he paid them no mind. His thoughts focused entirely on the battle. Compared to demon orcs, berserker orcs had a lower resistance to skills. Stunning it would be significantly easier. As long as he remained composed, there would be no difficulty in handling it. Without hesitation, Shin dashed forward. The orc reacted instantly, closing the distance in a single bound. In his past life, Shin had never instructed anyone to stay close to him. As a child, he had lived in constant fear. As an adult, he had merely struggled to survive. He refused to repeat the same cycle. This battle was more than just a fight, it was a chance to change. To break free from his weak past and uncertain future, he needed to prove his overwhelming abilities. His blade struck true, nearly cleaving the monster in half. He called out to the team, announcing that the orc was stunned. The captain seized the opportunity, rallying the party to launch a full assault. The team struck from all directions, relentlessly attacking until the berserker orc fell. With the dungeon cleared, some players remarked on how easy it had been. They realized how much Shin's skills had trivialized the challenge. Meanwhile, the porters exchanged conversations among themselves. Their leader expressed a desire to become Shin's personal porter, but Shin had no interest in them. Their attitude had shifted too quickly for his liking. As he assessed his progress, a notification revealed that he had leveled up once again. A new title had been bestowed upon him, this time a D-rank title. Unlike before, this had never been something he had achieved in his previous life. Yet even with his growing strength, he remained aware of one undeniable truth. He was still far from reaching the level of a certain man, Du Jiangsu, the legendary swordsman, a collector of titles, a master of the blade. In his past life, Shin had only been able to watch him from afar. But now in this life, surpassing him was no longer a distant dream. Lost in thought, Shin unknowingly made a strange expression while talking to himself. The porters witnessing this were startled. Their leader cautiously asked what he was doing. Without missing a beat, Shin dismissed it as simple stretching. The leader then approached, handing him an artifact that had dropped from the boss. Surprised, Shin questioned why it was being given to him. The captain clarified that Shin had carried the party through the battle. The artifact was only of bronze rank, so there was no reason for him to be concerned about it. The captain admitted that if the artifact had been expensive, he would not have given it away. This was the last time he and Shin would see each other, and offering the item was his final gift. It was a bittersweet moment, but deep down he had accepted the truth. Shin had become too strong for their party. He was already living in a different world from them, leaving them behind as he advanced further. From a distance, one of the players observed their interaction. A surge of displeasure filled him as he noted how much attention the captain was giving to Shin. Frustrated, he pulled out his phone and made a call. Shin arrived home, feeling satisfied with his progress as a player. In his past life he had barely made $200 a day, but now his earnings had increased significantly. On top of that, the captain had given him extra money along with an unexpected gift, the ring. Although it was only bronze ranked, the ring boosted his strength by 10 points and possessed a special skill called Lighten. This ability reduced the weight of any equipment to a mere gram. However, he quickly realized that maintaining the artifact's effect required a constant supply of mana. Most people lacked the necessary reserves, which explained why the ring was classified as bronze. Unlike most, Shin had no such limitation. A smile formed on his lips as he recalled the moment 50 years into his previous life, when he first discovered his ability. That experience had driven him to study mana extensively, leading him to consume an artifact that also demanded continuous mana. The results had been astonishing. Artifacts requiring mana usually suffered penalties when integrated with him, but in exchange they lost their mana cost entirely. Without hesitation he initiated mana synchronization with the berserker ring. He paid no mind to any potential drawbacks. To him, the more skills he acquired, the stronger he became. Meanwhile, at an exclusive private club, the player who had resented Shin arrived with an agenda. Sitting across from a man, he began discussing Shin's abilities. He revealed that Shin possessed a 4-second stun skill, expecting a reaction. However, his audience showed little interest. They dismissed the information, making it clear they had no intention of seeking revenge on his behalf. Desperate for their attention, he added another detail. Shin might be carrying an artifact and was loaded with cash. One of the men abruptly drew his sword and sliced off the speaker's ear. A sharp cry of pain filled the air as blood spilled onto the floor. Unfazed, the assailant poured alcohol over the fresh wound, the sting intensifying the agony. With a cold stare, he reminded him that they were not his personal servants. If he truly desired revenge, he needed to prepare something more valuable: cash. Shin arrived at the training ground and sat on the stairs, exhausted. His stomach growled as he recalled the unexpected discovery: cold cucumber soup had somehow appeared from the berserker ring. With hunger gnawing at him, he decided to test the ring's effect. Grabbing his sword, he tossed it into the air and watched as it floated like a feather before catching it again. The weapon felt lighter, and the cost of casting skills had completely vanished. However, the penalties added an extra 100 grams to the weight. For now, he relied solely on his greatsword, waiting until his stats improved. Opening his status window, he carefully analyzed his profile and stats. Without hesitation, he allocated all his free status points into luck, aiming to attract constellations. Since a player could only form a contract with one constellation, he knew the decision required careful thought. Ideally, he wanted one that complemented his strongest attribute: luck. Rising from the stairs, he acknowledged his current limitations. Since he lacked the necessary conditions to attract a constellation, training remained his only option. Once his training session ended, he got into his car and drove toward a dungeon. After 3 days of training, the long drive left him drained, but the effort had paid off. He had acquired basic swordsmanship skills. Upon reaching the dungeon gate, he prepared to enter alone. Securing a solo-player dungeon had required months of waiting, but luck had been on his side this time. A car sat parked at a distance behind him. Someone had followed him into the woods. Their intentions remained unclear, but whatever they planned, he could deal with it inside the dungeon. Without hesitation, he stepped through the gate. Moments later, they followed. Their purpose was clear: they had come to kill him. As they entered, a sound echoed through the dungeon. Shin sat on a rock, calmly observing them. He pointed out that this was a single-player dungeon, questioning why they had entered. It wasn't as if they had made a mistake. After all, he owned the dungeon. Weapons were already drawn. They dismissed his words, seeing no reason to back down. To them, Shin was nothing special, and if they eliminated him here, no one would ever find out. Shin assessed their formation. They had abandoned stability by excluding healers and mages, forming a party composed solely of swordsmen and an archer. A group specialized in hunting other players, a pack of hyenas. His mind drifted to his past life. These same players had met their end under the relentless surveillance of the Player Association. He understood their reasoning for being here, but for such parties, dealing with an archer was always the greatest challenge. Inside the dungeon, there was no escape. If 4 bodies needed disposal, this was the perfect place. One of the players grew agitated, but their captain halted him with a sword, urging patience. The man, however, refused to listen. Shin advised him to obey his leader, but his words only fueled the player's rage. Without hesitation, the man lunged forward and attacked. In that moment, Shin's thoughts aligned with the brutal reality of the dungeon. Survival of the fittest? What better phrase could describe this place? Monsters constantly risked their lives within these walls, and relics hidden in dungeons were highly sought after. Danger lurked at every turn, and carelessness meant death. With a swift motion, Shin retaliated. His blade struck true, cleaving his attacker in half. The sudden attack took them by surprise, and they immediately ran to create some distance from Shin. As soon as they started retreating, their leader ordered the archer to reposition and maintain range. The archer hesitated, troubled by the thought of trying to eliminate someone who had just awakened yet had already killed players who had reached level 100. Shin spun his sword in a circular motion, resembling a wheel, and questioned why they were running from him. In response, the archer turned and loosed 2 arrows. Without hesitation, Shin hurled his sword, intercepting the arrows mid-flight before the blade tore through the archer, killing him instantly. The boss had been closely observing Shin's movements and recognized the opportunity. The moment Shin threw his sword, he saw his chance to strike and rushed forward to end him. At the same time, Shin sprinted toward his weapon, both of them charging toward their respective targets. As they closed the gap, Shin was just about to reach his sword when 2 attackers lunged at him. Their weapons struck the ground, missing their mark as Shin, now airborne, evaded their assault. Their eyes widened in shock as they realized their attacks had failed. Shin landed with his sword in hand once more. The boss, unwilling to take the hit, grabbed one of his subordinates and used him as a human shield. The desperate act was futile. Shin's blade cut through the man instantly, and in the same stroke, the boss suffered a deep wound. Shin revealed their true nature. They were all involved in organ trafficking. The word struck with undeniable weight, leaving the boss stunned. No matter how Shin analyzed the situation, he found it hard to believe they operated under mutual trust. He understood their goal, acquiring mana stones through organ transplantation. Despite his injury, the leader smirked. To him, none of this mattered. His expression remained cold as he lunged forward for another attack, but before he could reach Shin, his body froze in place. Shin had activated his Demon Bash ability. Paralyzed and unable to move, the boss stood there helplessly. Shin calmly declared that it was over. The man who had taken countless lives without hesitation, now found himself on the other side of death. Shin stepped closer, pressing his sword against the boss's shoulder. The question lingered in the air: had he ever felt this same fear before taking another's life? There was no time for an answer. Now it was his turn. With one final stroke, Shin ended him. He wiped his sword clean, washing away the blood that stained its surface. He reminded himself not to grow accustomed to such situations. If he ever wanted a chance to become a constellation one day, he needed to remain grounded. Still, he knew that everything he had done was in self-defense. His gaze shifted to the artifacts left behind by his fallen enemies. Each one would serve as sustenance, fueling his path forward. Shin stood ready, having consumed all the items he had gathered. Checking his status window, he saw that every stat point had increased. Though he had hoped to avoid such an approach, the results proved it had been worth it. Based purely on stats, he estimated that his current strength was on par with players who had reached level 50. Reaching into his pocket, he retrieved a ring, the recovery ring. It had once belonged to the first person he had killed. The artifact possessed a valuable recovery skill, capable of removing abnormal effects. Acquiring such an item was a stroke of fortune. However, he realized that relying entirely on his stun skill could leave him vulnerable in certain situations. Next time he would have to be more cautious. Without hesitation, he began swallowing the ring. Inside the goblin's dungeon, 4 goblins moved together, heading somewhere. One of them suddenly stopped, ears twitching at an unfamiliar sound. Turning around, it saw Shin standing behind them, his sword in hand. His eyes were covered, yet he exuded unwavering confidence. He was aiming to earn a new title. The requirement: slay 500 monsters while blindfolded. The goblins muttered among themselves, unable to comprehend what the human was doing. One of them grinned, thinking this was an opportunity to take down easy prey. However, Shin had already begun sensing them. Their scent lingered in the air, the subtle shifts in the wind betraying their movements. Every sound, every vibration, every disturbance in the atmosphere formed a detailed image in his mind. The goblin lunged. In an instant, Shin's blade swung, cleaving through 3 goblins in a single stroke. As their bodies collapsed, a smile formed on his lips. An arrow whistled through the air toward him. With precise timing, he reached out and caught it effortlessly before crushing it to dust. The goblin archer, still perched at a distance, watched in shock. Shin advanced, his perception of the battlefield expanding with each step. The fight awakened buried instincts, allowing him to tap into the combat experience of his previous life. Without hesitation, he moved forward, already approaching his peak. More goblins gathered, their numbers growing. He stood undeterred, prepared to face them all. As the horde charged, Shin met them head-on, cutting through their ranks. Each swing of his sword reaped lives, his face soon streaked with their blood. A lone goblin, witnessing the massacre, trembled in terror. It realized too late that escape was impossible. By the time the slaughter ended, Shin stood amidst a field of lifeless bodies. The notification confirmed his success. He had leveled up. More importantly, he had acquired the title he sought, Lucky Day. It hadn't been difficult at all. The title granted an increase of 20 points to his luck stat. Additionally, every time he killed the same type of monster, his luck could rise by up to 10 more points. He had begun collecting the titles he desired. New goblins arrived at the scene, their eyes widening at the sight of their fallen brethren. The sheer devastation left them frozen in horror. Meanwhile, Shin grinned, already envisioning how much more his luck would grow by continuing the massacre. The latest tally confirmed that his luck stat had increased by 30 points, surpassing even the highest-ranking title available. To him, this title alone was worth billions. Suddenly, a red crack split open behind him. Sensing the shift, Shin turned. He knew exactly what was happening, though he hadn't expected it to occur so soon. 3 constellations had descended to seek a contract with him. The first, the sweeper of a falling dimension. The second, the pilgrim of vast space. The final, the goddess of luck. All 3 stood before him, awaiting his response. 3 constellations had descended before Shin, an event that left him astonished. He had never expected them to appear so soon, let alone all 3 at once. Among them was the goddess of luck, a presence that took him completely by surprise. A sense of nervousness crept over him as he questioned whether he was being too arrogant. In his previous life, he had never encountered anything like this. The goddess regarded Shin with a smile, her expression filled with warmth and curiosity. There was unmistakable interest in her gaze, as if she had never seen a swordsman so fortunate before. Shin in turn smiled back. He had invested all his free points into luck, and now it seemed that this decision had drawn divine attention. The 3 celestial beings had arrived with the intent to form a contract with him, but before making a decision, he needed to evaluate each one carefully. The first was the Warden of the Corrupt Dimension, a divine entity closely associated with slaughter. His interest in Shin stemmed from the brutal massacre of the goblins. The second was the Wandering Pilgrim in the Grand Universe. Unlike the Warden, this one puzzled Shin. There was no clear reason for his presence, though it seemed that the Goddess of Luck was somehow responsible for drawing him in. Among divine beings, she was known to be particularly popular. The goddess once again focused her gaze on Shin and made a statement that set her apart from the others. Unlike typical divine entities, she offered a unique opportunity. Choosing her would not prevent him from forming additional contracts with other deities. This revelation reminded Shin of a figure from his previous life. There had been a player, an archer, who had made a contract with the goddess of luck and another divine entity. That archer had possessed an uncanny ability to fire arrows into the sky and still strike his exact targets. Many had accused him of cheating or using tricks, but in reality he had simply harnessed the blessings of 2 constellations. It was none other than the goddess of Lucky who had made such feats possible. As the 3 divine beings stood before him, Shin felt a wave of confusion. The pressure to choose weighed heavily on him, but the deities dismissed his hesitation, urging him to abandon trivial concerns and make a decisive choice. The goddess of Lucky was undeniably a valuable patron, but a lingering doubt gnawed at him. What if no other deity appeared in the future? This decision would shape the rest of his life as a player. In his past life, when he had become a player, a decade had passed before a single deity had come to him. That entity, known as the late-blooming model student, had been a beacon of hope, a literal ray of light in his otherwise bleak existence. Shin had believed that his luck was finally changing. But nothing had improved. He had reached the age of 55 without ever benefiting from the divine blessings, as the requirements had been far too unrealistic. Even so, he had to acknowledge that this particular deity might have been the reason he was able to return to the past. For that, at the very least, he owed some measure of gratitude. Shin understood that he had to be even more cautious now, as he could not assume that another return to the past would ever be possible. His decision was critical. He had to choose between the divine power of the wandering pilgrim in the grand universe, the destructive force of the warden of the corrupt dimension, or the blessings of the goddess of luck. With his mind made up, Shin was ready. He clicked the accept button. His choice was the goddess of luck. She had not expected him to choose her, but as soon as the contract was established, she was overjoyed. The contract would last for 30 years, persisting even beyond his death. Reactions from other constellations varied. Some sincerely congratulated him on his choice, while others displayed open hostility, intent on hindering his growth. He had not anticipated attracting such attention from them, but his decision had been made. Shin reached out his hand. They had to support each other now. Slowly, she placed her hand in his and began bestowing her blessings upon him. As he gazed out his window, the first blessing was revealed. Every strike he landed would be a critical hit. The second blessing granted him the ability to see all hidden skills within artifacts. The third ensured that every boss monster he defeated would drop artifacts. The goddess took pride in the blessings she had granted. To Shin, they felt overwhelmingly powerful, almost broken in nature. But the blessings were not yet over. The fourth blessing enhanced his luck growth. Every point he invested in luck would count as 2, and this effect extended to the devourer of artifacts as well. Tears welled in Shin's eyes as he processed the magnitude of these gifts. When he turned back, the goddess urged him to make his second contract. The other 2 deities waited for his response. Instead of choosing immediately, Shin asked them to leave for now. He needed to focus on the goddess first. The 2 deities were taken aback by his decision. They did not conceal their intentions, warning him that if they met again they would kill him. Meanwhile, the goddess had transformed into a smaller form. She seemed to want to embrace him, but Shin was visibly nervous. He recalled her words, there was no need to be greedy just yet. Better opportunities would come later. With his decision made, Shin finally stepped into the boss room. The battle began. The goddess observed his fight, astonished at his strength, which had surged due to the devourer of artifacts. His opponent, however, matched his power. The boss was a greedy goblin lord. Shin launched an attack, but the goblin blocked it with his axe. The boss retaliated, deflecting Shin's strike and activating his skill, Intensity. Shin braced himself. The attack was not as lethal as paralysis, but it eroded his fighting spirit, trying to break his will to fight. In response, Shin activated Recovery. The goblin lord struck again, but his attack missed. Shin's skill allowed him to recover instantly. No matter how effective the boss's skill was, it failed to weaken him. Now fully recovered, Shin was ready to counterattack. The boss watched in disbelief as Shin struck, wounding him. Without hesitation, Shin activated Demon Bash, stunning his opponent for 2 seconds. He followed up with another relentless assault. He then used Delay, stunning the boss once more. The Goblin Lord struggled to understand what was happening, unable to move as Shin continued his assault. Appearing behind him, Shin attacked. Then reappearing in front he smiled. Panic overtook the boss. He realized in that moment that his time had run out. Shin fought relentlessly against the Goblin Lord, and after an intense battle he finally struck the fatal blow. The boss collapsed in front of him, his body lifeless. Shin's clothes were completely drenched in blood, his face equally covered in the aftermath of the battle. The moment the Goblin Lord hit the ground, the dungeon was officially cleared. Taking a deep breath, he tried to calm his mind, but exhaustion overwhelmed him. His body had reached its limit, and he collapsed onto the ground, unable to muster the strength to stand. Despite his fatigue, he received a new title, Don't Touch Me, which granted bonuses to both his luck and evasion stats. Although the stress weighed on him, he felt a sense of relief, reminding himself that he was still young. The day's events had pushed him beyond his limits, and his body had paid the price. The goddess of fortune appeared before him, remarking on how fortunate he was to have survived. However, Shin believed most people would attribute his success to skill rather than luck. She insisted that luck itself was a form of skill, expressing her happiness in supporting such a fortunate player. Choosing to ignore her words, Shin immediately focused on distributing his free stat points. Without hesitation he allocated all of them into his luck stat. The goddess showed clear annoyance at his decision, but Shin paid no attention to her frustration. His satisfaction grew as his luck stat reached 100. Once a stat surpassed 100, all related effects received an additional 10% boost. With that realization, both of them turned their attention to the loot dropped by the Goblin Lord. Thanks to Shin's enhanced luck, the drop rate of artifacts had increased even further. Among the rewards he obtained a shield, a silver-ranked artifact. It significantly boosted his defense stat and contained a special ability called Sacrifice. Although he did not concern himself too much with drop rates due to the goddess's blessing already guaranteeing artifact drops, he still appreciated the extra benefits. He acknowledged her role in his success, expressing his gratitude for her blessings. Placing his hand on the shield, he contemplated its potential. With his increased luck and the unique effects of his abilities, he believed he could raise the artifact's rank. Without hesitation he initiated synchronization with the shield. The goddess embraced him, her fondness for him evident. Shin observed her demeanor, noting that she seemed far more at ease compared to his previous contractor. Eventually he arrived at the quest area. A woman stood before him, visibly troubled. She had refused his suggestion outright, despite them discussing the same idea. Her reaction took him by surprise, making him momentarily nervous. She insisted that he reconsider his approach, making him question whether he had truly found the right solution. Before reaching his destination, the memory shifted back to an earlier moment. He was driving his car, lost in thought. His concern rested on the shield, specifically the fact that it had come from a goblin. However, absorbing the artifact was a straightforward task, so he pushed those concerns aside. His car, on the other hand, was another issue entirely. The vehicle had clearly reached its limits. It was in poor condition, and as he glanced at the control panel, the situation worsened. The fuel tank was empty, the battery had died, and the temperature gauge signaled that the engine was overheating. The realization caught him off guard. His car was in far worse shape than he had anticipated. The need for a replacement became apparent, but before he could even consider purchasing a new vehicle, a more pressing matter stood in his way. A house. Given the number of people likely seeking his death, he could not afford to level up consistently without caution. His survival required better equipment, stronger artifacts, and new skills to enhance his status. Silence filled his mind as he came to a singular conclusion. The solution to all his problems was money. A substantial amount of money was the only way to secure his future. And at that moment, there was only one place where he could acquire such wealth. The system designed for players had introduced quests, and an organization was responsible for managing those quests, the Players Association. Determined, he decided to visit the Players Association, knowing it was the only path to securing the funds he desperately needed. Returning to the present, uncertainty clouded his thoughts. The woman in front of him had made it clear that he needed to enter a dungeon suitable for his level. Raiding high-level dungeons was not an option just yet. Shin attempted to convince the woman before him to let him enter the dungeon. However, at only level 17, his request was met with strong resistance. Entering a low-level dungeon would be a waste of his time, yet she trembled and cried, fearing for his life. She insisted that he raid a dungeon appropriate for his level, but Shin remained steadfast, unwilling to listen to anyone. As the tense exchange continued, another woman approached from behind, inquiring about the situation. Shin turned to see her as the staff quickly reassured her that nothing significant had occurred. She was an A-ranked player, Kim Miso, known as the Marksman of Destruction. Shin immediately recognized her as the first player to reach level 100 and earn the title of Marksman. Her strength was undeniable, but what truly set her apart was her lineage. She was the daughter of Kim Yoon-chul, the president of Shinsung Biotechnics. Her guild, Adian, was composed of formidable players. Among them was Shin Tae, a shadow assassin widely regarded as the greatest in her class, and Cho Jin-ho, the nation's most skilled swordsman. Both were core members of the guild, which solidified its reputation as one of the strongest. Kim Miso, born into immense privilege, had the largest diamond spoon in players' history, securing her a place among the elite from the very beginning. Observing Shin, she noted that she had never seen him before. In response, he explained his reason for wanting to enter a high-level dungeon: he needed money. Onlookers, who had previously assumed Kim Miso was angry with Shin for his attitude, now turned their full attention to their conversation. The murmurs grew as people speculated about her reaction. Kim Miso cautioned Shin about the dangers of high-level dungeons. He, however, was already well aware of the challenges that awaited within. Having been reborn, he knew exactly what risks lay ahead. His only response to her was a simple statement: high risk comes with high rewards. There was no resentment in his tone, no lingering hatred from their past interaction. In his previous life he had sought to join her team, only to be rejected. Yet he carried no grudge. A sudden realization struck him: solo players were restricted from entering high-level dungeons alone. That rule would only be lifted 4 years later. Accepting the situation, he turned to leave, admitting fault for not knowing this beforehand. But before he could walk away, Kim Miso smiled and told him to stop. Turning back, he was met with an unexpected offer. She invited him to join her team. Shock spread among those watching. The astonishment in the crowd was quickly replaced by jealousy. Shin, however, remained wary. He could not understand what she truly wanted from him. Pressing for clarification, he questioned her intentions. She simply stated that she wished to help fellow players. Yet Shin had learned not to trust mere words. There were always conditions attached. As their conversation continued, the staff remained clueless about the deeper meaning behind their exchange. Kim Miso presented her condition. He only needed to make her a promise. If he disappointed her, he would have to pay the price. But if he proved himself to be as strong as he claimed, she would owe him an apology. Studying her closely, Shin realized her true intent. She only wanted to test him. Kim Miso's influence extended far beyond her abilities as a player. Even the clothes she wore turned into fashion brands. She had a habit of testing confident players to see if their arrogance was backed by skill. A grin formed on Shin's face. Without hesitation, he suggested they leave immediately. Excitement surged through him. The situation was becoming far more interesting than he had anticipated. Earlier, as soon as Kim Miso arrived at the player association, her driver wished her good luck before she stepped out. She instructed him to wait while she entered the dungeon. Since all her guild members were occupied, she decided to form a party with random players. While speaking with the staff, she was handed her level 100 badge. As she prepared for her mission, a commotion nearby caught her attention. She turned to see Shin arguing with the association staff about entering the dungeon alone. Observing him, she realized that the current party regulations for the quest provided her with a reason to work with him. She smiled, noticing the nervous expression on the staff member's face as he addressed her. Listening in on their conversation, she grew more interested in Shin. Eventually, both agreed to enter the dungeon together. Curious about the quest Shin had requested to enter alone, she questioned a female staff member, who hesitated before pulling up the quest window. Sliding it toward Miso, the staff member urged her to take a look. The request involved a defense quest centered around hunting wolves. The recommended level for the mission was 100, and the enemy count totaled 300 monsters. Analyzing the details, she realized Shin had not requested a raid quest but a defense quest, which required them to eliminate every monster to succeed. The standard requirement for clearing a defense dungeon was a team of 4. 1 tank, 2 damage dealers and a ranged damage dealer. Despite these minimum requirements, Shin intended to take on the mission alone. To any experienced player, this was nothing short of suicide. When he asked if she was nervous about the mission, she initially dismissed the thought. However, as he pointed out that she had been staring at the quest window for a while, she trembled with frustration at his words. The female staff member watching the exchange was confused as to why he was upsetting Miso. Before he could continue speaking, she suddenly grabbed his hand. Smiling, she reassured the staff that there was no issue. She had already accepted the quest request. A surge of blue lightning filled the hall as they were immediately transported to the quest area. The staff woman remained concerned for them, but with Kim Miso accompanying Shin, she believed they would return safely. Meanwhile, the surrounding players expressed their disbelief, questioning whether Shin could complete the mission successfully. Another player voiced skepticism, wondering how a mere level 17 player could survive against such odds. One person speculated that Miso had a strategy in mind. After all, she was the youngest A+ ranked player. The association had recently introduced a new ranking system to evaluate a player's strength, taking into account two primary factors: the number of dungeons cleared and overall combat understanding. Kim Miso's high rank was earned solely based on her exceptional combat understanding. Even though she was a formidable player, there were still creatures even stronger than her. Despite all the speculation, what truly stirred jealousy among the onlookers was the fact that Shin had entered the dungeon alone with Miso. The dungeon resembled a city landscape. Its name was Night and Wolf, and the objective was to defend a bridge from an onslaught of monsters. As an archer, Miso positioned herself atop a tower, granting her a full view of the battlefield. From there she could clearly see the approaching monsters. Down below, Shin stood in the middle of the bridge awaiting their arrival. Watching him closely, she reminded herself that if he found himself in danger, it would be her responsibility to intervene. She had accepted this mission, and she could not allow him to fail. Shin met her gaze and smiled. 30 minutes earlier, before their arrival, Shin had meticulously inspected his sword. He had warned her not to interfere unless he explicitly asked for help. His words had startled her. He then declared that she would receive only 5% of the total reward from the monster hunt. Advising her to position herself at a high vantage point, he instructed her to attack only upon his signal. Her concern for him deepened. With 300 monsters in the dungeon, there was no way he could handle them alone. The mission's difficulty was apparent to her. Even at level 100, this was no easy task. Staring at him in silence, she found herself amazed by his unwavering confidence. Standing tall with a fearless smile, Shin urged her to simply wait and watch. Prepared for battle, he braced himself for the approaching monsters. The wolves finally emerged. Their bodies glowed with an eerie blue light as they advanced. Without hesitation, Shin struck the ground with his weapon. There was no way he would allow a single monster to pass him. The battle began as Shin and the monsters charged at each other. Miso observed silently as Shin engaged them, eliminating each one with swift precision. Every strike was executed flawlessly without wasted movement, cutting them down in mere seconds. He turned back with a smile, enjoying the sound of their demise. Miso was astonished, recognizing that Shin was far from ordinary. His attacks maintained a perfect balance of offense and defense, avoiding unnecessary motions while maximizing efficiency. Despite his skill, she believed there was still much to improve, given the sheer number of enemies still standing. Shin soon found himself surrounded, as these were no ordinary monsters that a level 17 player should be able to handle alone. Miso sensed something unusual and was caught off guard when she noticed that all the creatures Shin had attacked had suddenly frozen in place. Realizing that he had used a stunning ability, she was so shocked that she lost her balance, nearly falling but managing to steady herself just in time. She analyzed the effect and estimated that it lasted 4 seconds, enough time for Shin to eliminate them all. Smiling as he continued his onslaught, Shin made quick work of the stunned enemies. However, he soon noticed something unexpected. A powerful presence emerged, cutting through the smaller monsters effortlessly. Anticipating its arrival, Shin felt a sense of unease. The new opponent was a massive black wolf, mercilessly slaughtering its own kind as it charged toward him. Unlike any creature he had encountered before, even in his past life, its presence stirred distant memories within him. Miso too was taken aback when the boss monster unleashed a stun ability, identical to the one Shin had used. The effect was so powerful that it extended even to her position high above. However, she remained unaffected due to the pendant she wore, which contained an artifact that nullified such effects. She recalled that this creature possessed a stun skill but had nearly forgotten about it. Now, with Shin directly in harm's way, she prepared to act. She reasoned that while Shin could likely stun the boss, he had no means of countering its ability due to his low level. Contrary to her expectations, Shin activated his skill recovery, completely negating the stun effect, and charged forward at full speed. Miso was stunned. His mastery of the sword was undeniable, and now he displayed an extended stun duration along with the ability to remove debuffs. For a level 17 player, such abilities were unprecedented. The Black Wolf was equally shocked when Shin suddenly broke free from the stun. Its instincts told it that its prey should have been immobilized, yet Shin was already upon it. Seizing the opportunity, he executed a rapid maneuver, slipping beneath the beast before it could react. By the time it noticed, it was too late. With a swift motion, he slashed at its belly while sliding under it. The force of his attack drained the monster's health entirely, causing it to collapse. Emerging from beneath its lifeless body, Shin stood up, his clothes drenched in blood. He grinned, finding the battle exhilarating. Miso, still positioned on the building, had not fired a single shot throughout the raid. She smiled in disbelief, struggling to process what she had just witnessed. Shin, having defeated the mid-boss, the Black Wolf, in order to fully complete the defense quest, all 300 wolf-type monsters had to be eliminated. By this point he had already defeated 299 of them. His rapid progress in leveling up was evident, and he seemed quite pleased with his advancement. As a result of his achievement, he also obtained a D-rank title, which significantly improved his abilities. This title granted him immunity to the debuffs caused by any regular wolf-type monster, allowing him to ignore their effects with ease. However, it was not enough to counteract the debuff from the boss monster, leaving him still vulnerable to its effects. Turning around, he glanced at Miso, who was still standing atop a building, appearing completely shocked by what she had witnessed. Her reaction brought a smile to his face as he assessed her expression, realizing that she likely still struggled to believe in his skills. It was clear that she was deeply curious about how he had managed to clear this stage with such ease. With a confident stance, he gripped his weapon and made up his mind. Believing that he should continue showcasing his strength, he maintained an air of excitement. Now, with only one enemy left, the final battle was about to begin. Suddenly, a powerful roar echoed across the battlefield. The sound signaled the arrival of the final boss, an enormous and menacing creature. This was the true test awaiting him. Standing his ground, he prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The monster's imposing presence filled the area with tension, yet he remained unfazed. Fully aware of his own capabilities, he knew he could defeat it without much difficulty. His confidence, however, only served to enrage the beast. Overcome with fury, the monster let out another deafening roar, directing its rage toward him. The final boss was introduced as the full moonwolf lord. Wasting no time, it immediately launched a vicious attack, attempting to overpower him. However, he skillfully dodged the incoming assault with ease. Analyzing the creature's movements, he recalled that its attacks were highly specialized. Unlike ordinary monsters, this one relied on an irregular attack pattern, making it far more unpredictable. Despite this, he remained composed, ready to counter whatever came next. The battle between Shin and the monstrous adversary raged on with relentless intensity. Every time the creature launched an attack, Shin countered with swift precision, evading each strike effortlessly. Despite the sheer resistance of the beast, he was not surprised, acknowledging that a boss at the level of a bounty hunter was bound to possess such formidable endurance. He had anticipated that his initial assault would be ineffective, and his expectations were confirmed as the monster resisted the damage. Meanwhile, Miso observed the battle with growing excitement. She found herself astonished by his capabilities, questioning how a mere human could demonstrate such extraordinary skill. Her thoughts raced as she tried to comprehend what set him apart. Unlike others, he had developed a method to completely nullify the monster's debuffs, effortlessly rendering them inactive. The clash continued at full force, each exchange between them growing more intense. No matter how quickly the creature attacked, Shin remained one step ahead, dodging with ease. Every counterattack he launched tested the monster's defenses, yet the beast showed no signs of slowing down. Instead, it adjusted its approach, unleashing a relentless second wave of attacks. Still, he managed to evade with flawless precision, frustrating the creature further. As the fight progressed, Miso began to understand the depth of his skill. It was not merely his reflexes but his ability to recognize and predict the irregular attack patterns that the Wolf Lord executed. Unlike others, he had learned to read and neutralize these unpredictable movements, making it nearly impossible for the creature to land a decisive blow. Despite his confidence, he gradually began to realize the battle was lasting far longer than anticipated. If the situation continued this way, he would soon be left with no options. His stamina was draining, and his energy reserves were rapidly depleting. As exhaustion crept in, he started to consider a new strategy. While maneuvering through the fight, he suddenly felt the weight of his own fatigue. The prolonged struggle was taking a toll on him, and he found himself hoping for even a brief moment of respite. However, the monster refused to let up, launching yet another brutal sequence of attacks. His health had plummeted from 700 to a mere 120, and he knew that after just one or two more hits, he would be finished. At that critical moment, his eyes locked onto something. The creature had positioned itself directly behind him, preparing for a decisive strike. Recognizing its attack pattern, he quickly devised a plan. He understood that the monster was about to unleash its most powerful attack, and he intended to counter it by using a bait strategy. Shin swiftly halted, readying himself for battle against the monstrous foe. He acknowledged the deadly attack pattern known as bull flot, which had claimed the lives of countless players. However, unlike those before him, he was aware of its mechanics and intended to turn it into an advantage in combat. In desperate times, he reasoned, desperate measures were necessary. As the monster lunged at him, he reacted instantly, using his sword to sever its attacking limb before it could land the first strike. However, the creature's second attack came at an overwhelming speed, far faster than expected. Witnessing this, Miso's eyes widened in shock. Her face turned pale as she struggled to process what was happening. The monster's attack had landed on Shin, leaving his allies in despair. Miso, overwhelmed with sorrow, collapsed to her knees, tears welling up in her eyes. Regret consumed her as she realized she had taken the situation too lightly. Despite witnessing Sunjian's incredible feats of strength, she had allowed her guard to drop, thinking he could handle anything. Now, guilt washed over her as she lamented her actions. If she had intervened sooner, she believed this tragedy could have been avoided. However, an unexpected turn of events unfolded. A special effect triggered, granting a powerful healing ability based on the specific body part that had sustained damage. Observing this phenomenon, both Miso and Sungyun watched intently. He recognized the skill as a healing condition-based ability, something incredibly useful. Absorbing its effects, he contemplated which part of his body should receive the restoration. Given the rarity of healing options and the heavy strain placed on the back during combat, he made his decision. With his HP fully restored, he realized just how close he had been to death. Had he miscalculated even slightly, he would have perished. However, fortune had been on his side, a fact that his opponent would now have to reckon with. The real concern, he noted, was who would save the monster now. At that moment he activated Demon Dash. The ability took effect, paralyzing the monster completely. It could not move, trapped by his counterattack. As he assessed the situation, he acknowledged just how lucky he had been throughout this battle. The scene concluded with Shin eliminating the boss monster, just as Miso arrived at his side. Reflecting on the battle, he noted how his skill had triggered for the third time, making it feel as though he were trapped in some kind of cycle. Miso, annoyed, asked why he did not told her that he could use healing skills. Observing him, his companion also questioned how he had known every attack pattern of the Wolf Lord in advance. She joked, questioning if he is living his second life or something, emphasizing that countless players had fallen to these very techniques. The battle had ended, yet unanswered questions remained. However, for now the fight was over, and all that was left was to prepare for what lay ahead. Shin successfully defeated the monster. Miso arrived shortly afterward, intrigued and visibly unsettled by what she had witnessed. She begins questioning how Shin could possibly know so much about the dungeon and recognize every pattern used by the monster. Her thoughts lead her to compare him to a high-ranking player, someone experienced enough to raid a dungeon with skill and precision. As Shin releases the tension built up from the fight, Miso senses that the pressure around him is increasing to an almost overwhelming level. She clarifies her thoughts, suggesting that watching him feels like witnessing a ranked player in action, someone well above the norm. Meanwhile, Shin misinterprets her words momentarily, thinking she was about to refer to him as a regressor, someone who had returned from the future. He quickly dismisses the idea, realizing he may have overanalyzed her comments, especially given how unlikely it would be for someone ordinary like him to possess such insight. Miso then brings him back to reality, pointing out that there is still a monster to finish off. Shin, momentarily lost in thought, regains focus and observes the creature as it gasps for its final breaths. With clear intent, he prepares to end it, expressing anticipation at what this victory might bring. He explains that when he isolates himself within a radius of a few meters from others, whether monsters or people, a one-on-one scenario is created, triggering a passive ability. In such a setting, all his stats are automatically boosted by 20%. Once the battle concludes, the stats return to normal. This victory, he realizes, will earn him his first C-class title, a significant step in his growth. In response, Miso admits she already knew he would succeed. Shin then wonders aloud whether she had also cleared this stage alone before. She confidently confirms it, asserting her own abilities, though she soon pauses and reveals something more honest. She confesses that she had numerous artifacts at her disposal during her own run, and those items played a critical role in her success. Shin responds without judgment. He acknowledges that acquiring artifacts is a skill in itself, and her ability to obtain and use them effectively is part of her strength. Grateful for his understanding, Miso offers her thanks, closing the moment on a note of mutual respect. Miso finds herself reflecting deeply after receiving the compliment. She thinks back to the time she had to spend 200 billion bones just to acquire an artifact strong enough to clear a dungeon. Yet, this person in front of him had done the same thing without needing any artifact at all. Using nothing more than a plain sword that could be found easily in any street market, this individual had managed to clear the dungeon entirely alone. The comparison between them feels unreasonable to her, almost insulting, given the resources and effort she had to invest in contrast. The girl then shifts the focus, suggesting they take advantage of the current opportunity to test out Shin's new effect. As he processes her words, he seems confused by what she means. Suddenly, the face-off title activates by itself, but he quickly deactivates it, not ready to explore its full implications just yet. Miso begins to leave, stating that she will send all her porters to help carry out their loot. This would make it easier to transport everything without hassle. Shin expresses his gratitude while watching her walk away. Before fully departing, she announces her intention to give him a 5% cut from the reward after completing the quest. He tries to refuse, saying it would be unfair. However, she insists, saying that no matter what he says, she will ensure he receives it. She encourages him to accept it as an investment, pointing out that they will be working together more frequently in the future and opportunities like this will continue to arise. After her departure, Shin is left contemplating how difficult it is to lower his guard when she is nearby. His thoughts are interrupted by a sparkling glint in his eyes as he turns around and notices the loot. Among the items there is a platinum artifact, a rare and valuable piece classified as a special equipment type accessory. This artifact, upon being equipped, grants significant bonuses. It increases the user's health and mana by 100 points each. Even more notably, it boosts the user's luck stat. For Shin, whose luck was already nearing the maximum, this enhancement pushes him even closer to the limits of what is possible. Shin gains an additional 50 points, which fills him with immense joy. Acquiring a platinum rank artifact brings a rare moment of satisfaction, and he instinctively presses it against his chest with pride. He contemplates the value of such an item, realizing that selling it outside could easily earn him billions. With that kind of fortune, he would finally be able to afford an apartment in Seoul City that offers access to rare artifacts. At that moment, the goddess of luck appears. She claims that the fortunate encounter was the result of her intervention, stemming from a mysterious sensation meant to help him succeed in life. However, Shin rejects any notion of owing her thanks. He insists that his maxed-out luck stat was achieved through his own effort and had nothing to do with her. A constellation being, witnessing this interaction, grows visibly agitated. It finds the goddess of luck's behavior unfair and raises objections. Tension builds between them until a confrontation begins, an event known as Rift Lifts. The constellation is removed from its position due to the conflict. Shin had already expected this outcome, aware of how popular and influential the goddess of luck was among the constellations. Shifting focus, he turns his attention back to the platinum rank artifact. After absorbing the artifact's power, he discovers that it can draw in 40% of another artifact's stats. As a result, he gains near invincibility against wolf and dog-type monsters, making him significantly stronger than before. This grants him a noticeable boost in confidence. Eventually he exits the dungeon. A large crowd is already waiting for him outside, buzzing with speculation. Whispers spread about whether he had truly cleared a level 100 dungeon on his own, despite being only level 17. People around express disbelief, while others support the claim, especially after hearing Miss Kim's testimony, which no one dares to doubt. Even the receptionist is shocked, torn between worry and amazement. Miss Kim calmly reassures everyone, stating that no sane person would allow a level 17 player to take on such a mission unless they were certain of his abilities. She admits she would have stopped him herself under different circumstances. The receptionist, overwhelmed with emotion, begins to cry. She had suffered greatly due to the earlier misunderstandings and now realizes the truth. Shin quietly acknowledges her pain, understanding the situation more clearly now. Soon after, numerous recruiters approach Shin, eager to invite him into their guilds. He finds himself caught off guard by the attention. Just then, Miso steps forward, cutting through the crowd. She apologizes, pointing out that there are urgent matters between them that need to be discussed. Miso glances back to signal that they are leaving, prompting Shin to follow her out, much to the frustration of the recruiters left behind. Internally, Shin feels a sense of relief. He is thankful that Miso has pulled him away from the overwhelming attention, though a part of him remains wary, wondering what her real intentions might be. Inside the car, Shin takes the passenger seat while casually checking his phone. His eyes widen when he sees the balance, 500 million won. The speed at which the reward has been transferred catches him off guard. He takes a moment to admire the screen, acknowledging how swiftly things have progressed. He makes a remark about the efficiency of the system, and Miso attributes the speed not only to the A-rank porters but also to her own direct involvement in the process. Shin expresses his gratitude once more, and Miso quietly observes him, noting his reactions and demeanor. After a moment of silence, she turns to her driver and instructs him to activate secret mode. Instantly, the vehicle responds. Its windows become opaque, cutting off any visibility or external monitoring. Shin is visibly startled by the sudden change. As the situation sinks in, his expression shifts. He realizes that there was likely another reason behind Miso offering him the ride. The atmosphere becomes tense as he braces for her true motives. Miso, without any further delay, tells him exactly what she wants. She intends for him to join the guild Eden. Shin teased Miso for her direct and straightforward approach, and she responded by highlighting the symbolic meaning behind the guild's name Eden, which represents a paradise for players. Deep down, Shin acknowledged that he would be lying if he said he hadn't anticipated this kind of proposal before his regression. In his previous life, he had been just an ordinary guy, and being part of something larger had brought him a sense of comfort and security. He used to belong to a small guild that took in people without talent or direction. It had been a safe place for him, but everything changed after a certain incident. Now that his growth was accelerating rapidly, even the most well-structured guild would only serve as a limitation. For the time being, he concluded it was better to go solo and expressed his apologies. Miso already knew that he intended to start a one-man guild, something Shin didn't deny, though her insight surprised him. She revealed her background as the daughter of a corporation chairman, explaining that with Shin's level of skill, it wasn't difficult to figure out his intentions. What truly mattered was that, at that moment, she was the only one who knew the full truth. Shin was taken aback that she was still laying all her cards on the table, clearly trying to build a mutually beneficial relationship for the future. He couldn't deny that she was an exceptionally skilled negotiator. Not far from the player city, near Jamsil Station, Shin was in the middle of purchasing an apartment. The deposit was 100 million won with a monthly rent of 5 million. He was surprised by how casually she mentioned such a steep price while smiling, but she assured him that it was actually a good deal. She left him to settle in, explaining him to call her if there was any problem. Shin tells her to take care and begin to reflect on how quickly he had managed to find a place. He wonders if this might be another intervention of the goddess of luck. Although his time since returning had been short, a lot had already happened. The mysterious regression had left him uncertain about his next steps, questioning how to move forward. But then, unexpectedly, he felt something he hadn't in a long time, the rush of blood through his veins, the energy of youth. He realized he wasn't meant for a quiet life. His body demanded action, and so he made a decision. He would live differently and never again be a coward. Opportunities for growth began to appear, such as when Park Young-min from the Player Journal mentioned him by name, increasing his visibility in the player community. Before leaving, Miso invited him to join an exploration team heading into an unidentified gate. She explained they were forming an open team, and Shin accepted immediately, catching her off guard. But he had been waiting for something like this for a while. Unlike fixed dungeons that followed set patterns, this kind of gate was constantly changing. Its entrances shifted in real time, and even the monsters inside varied. It was undeniably riskier, but the rewards were better as well. The first clear bonus even guaranteed a high-grade artifact, possibly on par with Miso's own. Before their paths separated, Miso handed him her phone to save his number, but she forgot to unlock it. This gave Shin a glimpse at her wallpaper, which showed 2 memorials. She apologized, calling herself clumsy at times. Shin could have asked about the story behind the image, but he knew that all players had their burdens. Even he had one that he couldn't share with anyone. That moment made him think about the previous constellation, making he wonder where she might be. They spend several years together over hard times, and he asks himself if one day she will show herself for him once more. Meanwhile, in the VIP room of the Eden Guild, a man spoke with Miso. He said he had been waiting for a chance to catch up with her over coffee, but noticed she was fixated on her phone, clearly awaiting messages. Miso confirmed that she was in communication with Shin, as they were preparing for a gate together. The man remarked that she might have developed feelings for Shin, but he also remembered Shin as the one capable of stunning enemies longer than himself. Shin had turned down Miso's invitation to join the guild, and she remarked that if that were true, he should start getting nervous. Shin's swordsmanship was reaching an impressive level. The man thought she was getting ahead of herself, believing that comparing the two of them now was a bit excessive. This man was Jajin Ho, a level 700 S-rank player. The narrative then shifts to a place called Jamsil 4-3 training ground, where Shin is standing with someone behind him. He is on a phone call with Miso. They are about to talk about the gate. She informs him that preparations have already been made and her team is ready for the next challenge. She details that the gate appeared approximately 500 meters northwest of Chunian Station on Line 7. The preliminary reconnaissance of the intermediate zone has been completed, and they now need to proceed there. Miso also mentions that she has already shared all available internal information with Shin, who now only needs to confirm it. Shin takes some time to verify the information about the gate. He realizes it will involve a mid-level boss. The description of the boss monster points to a Cerberus type, canine/wolf category. The level is approximately 100, and the monster has multiple heads with tearing multi-attacks. The fact that the gate's monster is of the canine/wolf type excites Shin, since it is very convenient, as he had just acquired a skill that gives him an advantage against that type. His new skill allows him to recover his status 5 times faster. Furthermore, the skill makes him immune to attacks from wolf-type monsters. After analyzing the information, Shin thanks Miso for informing him in advance. As soon as the call ends, the man next to him asks sarcastically what Shin will do now, given how long the call took. It turns out that this person is the team leader named Hyung. Shin apologizes for making him wait, calling Hyung leader. Hyung says he is just joking. He states that he understands Shin is now someone important, and by the way, he is no longer the leader since they are not inside a dungeon. Shin smiles, replying that he is far from being famous. Hyung, surprised by Shin's relaxed behavior, asks if he hasn't received any strange calls yet. Shin asks what kind of calls, prompting Hyung to show his cell phone to explain better. Hyung shows that Shin is featured in the player journal, saying that this is what being famous looks like. In the article, it is described that a legendary rookie appeared like a comet, highlighting Shin's name and introducing his feats. Shin is surprised by what he sees, and Hyung smiles, joking that the best thing Shin can do is turn off his phone to avoid all kinds of calls. Shin reflects on what he saw, making him wonder if it is normal for the company to publish about someone without even talking to the person first. Suddenly, attention turns to Shin's phone, which has already started receiving calls from distant relatives. Shin ignores it all, getting straight to the point with Hyung about the objective of the day. Hyung then shows Shin a bag with yellow energy emanating from it. Shin is surprised and happy with the contents of the bag, thanking Hyung immensely. Hyung responds that there is no need to thank him, since it won't be for free after all. The contents of the bag are a variety of artifacts. All the artifacts were once used by Hyung, which is convenient for Shin, making him ask if it wouldn't have been better to buy new ones. Justifying that, Shin only intends to boost Hyung's fighting spirit and determination. Hyung, frustrated, notes that Shin is coming up with silly excuses. Shin tries to explain that there may be some kind of superstition or bad luck associated with using old artifacts. But in fact, old artifacts have better absorption. Then an unknown woman arrives at the scene, apologizing for being late. She explains that her delay was due to the difficulty in finding a place to park, asking if she can now begin the appraisal of the artifacts. Shin questions who the woman is since she has not introduced herself. Hyung explains that she is the appraiser who will evaluate the artifacts to help with the transaction. Hyung then grabs Shin in a friendly way, saying that he brought her to warn Shin not to cheat him by paying less than the artifacts are worth just because the two are friends. Shin retorts, saying that he would never do that. The woman soon begins her work, laying the artifacts on the ground over a cloth and activating her appraisal skill. After much concentration, the woman finally finishes the analysis with relief, as it apparently was not an easy task. She declares that, according to the appraisal, the agreed-upon value between the parties is correct to proceed. Hyung jokes that Shin indeed didn't try to depreciate the items. Shin jokes back, affirming once again that he wouldn't do that. Hyung unsheathes his sword and announces there is something to do before the last sale. Shin watches in surprise. Concerned about his performance, considering Shin's strength, Hyung asks if Shin can evaluate his sword skills. Shin responds shyly that he's not in a position to judge anyone's qualifications. Hyung cuts to the chase, asking Shin not to keep up the false humility. He states he's not dumb enough to not notice Shin is far above in level, nor is he too proud to let that get in the way of learning. Shin tries to defend himself, but Hyung insists that he dislikes situations like this. They exchange glances. Shin assesses the situation, and then Hyung, with a serious expression, declares that it's rude to ignore someone being sincere. Shin accepts Hyung's request and asks him to show everything he's got. Hyung lights up and prepares for his demonstration. Shin turns to the woman, saying it's better for her to stand back, and positions her behind him. She understands the concern and complies. Hyung, prepared, announces he will begin the demonstration, giving it his all. He starts delivering various strikes, fully focused on his movements, with absolute focus and putting in his best effort. While the woman is visibly affected by the energy of the strikes, Shin remains unmoved. He reflects that Hyung has improved greatly since the dungeon and clearly hasn't skipped a single day of training. However, something feels off in Hyung's execution. After the demonstration, Shin calls Hyung's attention, surprising him for stopping so soon, as Hyung says he could have shown more. Concerned, Shin asks if something happened to Hyung's left arm. The question leaves Hyung completely disarmed. Hyung then asks how Shin knows something's wrong, and Shin promptly responds. Shin noticed that when Hyung swings his right hand, his left shoulder opens too early, as if he's overly concerned about that side. Hyung acknowledges that Shin is right. He hesitates briefly but then explains that there's indeed something wrong with his left side. Shin smiles, realizing it was something Hyung wouldn't hide. Hyung explains that most of his injuries came from that side during training in dungeons, but he hasn't been able to fix that flaw. Shin interrupts, saying it's something that can be fixed, leaving Hyung stunned. Getting even closer, Shin explains that solving it is simpler than it seems, stating that Hyung doesn't need to hide the flaw, but should instead adopt a style that accommodates his concern with the left side. Helping with Hyung's grip, Shin explains that from the hold to the rhythm, the necessary changes won't be easy, but the return is guaranteed. The explanations and the closeness between the two generate double meanings, leaving the woman confused as she watches. Hyung says Shin's grip is hurting, and Shin tells him to hold on a little longer. The woman, caught off guard, becomes completely embarrassed as she sees Shin asking Hyung to bend his waist back, while Hyung says he's enjoying it. She watches the training from a distance, wondering what the hell is going on. To wrap up her work, the woman opens her post-work app, trying to find a plausible motivation for the two's behavior. Sometime later, Shin is in his car, continuing with his day. As he drives, he reflects on the amount spent during the deal, but concludes that the benefits certainly go beyond what he spent. Hyung seemed satisfied with the training, but the woman was giving them a strange look after they finished. While driving, Shin shows eagerness to consume the artifacts and check his progress. He also longs for a new dungeon and considers calling Miso. Suddenly, something surprises Shin. He slams on the brakes, avoiding hitting two men. With the car stopped, Shin apologizes and asks if the men are okay. However, the response is unexpected. The gangsta Chubby complains about how long Shin took to arrive. Approaching the car as if he were an authority, the gangsta complains that he's tired of waiting so long. Shin doesn't understand the situation. The gangsta gets irritated and orders Shin to get out of the car. The other man mocks the situation, acting like Shin's surprised reaction is something routine for them, calling him an idiot. The Chubby, standing beside Shin, conjures a fire spell, saying there's no need for conversation, just asking if Shin wants to turn into ashes along with his junk car if he doesn't get out. Then Shin remembers who these two individuals are. They're Choi and Cho from the Utopia Guild. They make money by creating videos, each with a different approach. Their content is based on extreme acts, which results in them having few loyal fans and low numbers. At some point, the duo crossed the line, which led to a life sentence. Shin decides to get out of the car and is immediately provoked by the foolish duo. He analyzes them. Choi, the Chubby, is currently a B rank, level 100, while Cho, the supporting actor, is C rank, level 75. Shin is annoyed that weird people keep crossing his path. His goal was to consume the artifacts and test the results, but these clowns aren't the kind of opponents he had in mind for that. Now out of the car, Shin faces the men, surprising them with his boldness. Shin asks what happens from here. Choi tries to control the conversation and says they're part of the site's security. He claims to have received complaints about an idiot driving a junk car around the area. Choi adds, while forcefully kicking Shin's car, that people are upset a piece of junk is being associated with their image. Shin is stunned by Choi's boldness, and Choi asks if he understands the situation. Shin looks at the damage done to his car as he hears Choi say that unless Shin wants the car sent to the junkyard, he should leave immediately. Nearby, another duo notices the commotion, recognizing it as more trouble from the usual troublemakers. After a closer look, they also realize that the victim is a guy they saw in the magazine trying to recall his name. Choi and Cho also remember Shin as the guy from the magazine, noting his appearance in the dungeon alongside Miso and pointing out he pretty much cleared the dungeon alone. Choi doesn't believe it, saying Shin looks too weak. Cho reminds Choi that Miso was with Shin, concluding that she wouldn't let a newbie take all the glory. The pair then laugh hysterically as Cho declares he already knows what title to put on their next video. They approach Shin again, now recording with the intent to humiliate him and turn it into online content. Shin, however, is completely shaken due to the damage to his car. Choi challenges Shin to a one-on-one fight, saying that if Shin loses, he'll be used in the video and has to leave the city. But if Shin wins, the duo will stay as far away from him as possible. Shin, utterly drained by the pair's behavior, accepts the challenge. Choi is thrilled by the newbie's courage. However, the atmosphere shifts completely when Shin states that he will only accept if a 500 million won bet is placed, declaring that if the duo is afraid, they'd better disappear. Choi gets irritated by Shin's reaction, and before he can respond, Cho interrupts. Choi asks what Cho wants, claiming he's busy, but Cho needs to show him what the people watching the livestream on his phone are saying. Countless viewers watching the situation are demanding the 500 million bet. Choi is impressed by the number of requests and it puts him in a tight spot. Shin in turn pressures Choi to accept the terms. Choi knows that if he goes through with it, the violent content of the video won't be monetized. In the end, he decides to proceed, confident in his victory, seeing it as a chance to blow off steam. The time he takes to reflect stresses Shin out. Moments later, Shin and Choi prepare for battle, with several people watching in person and others through Cho's livestream. Some of the people present still aren't aware of what's going on. While some recognize Shin, others only know it's just another mess caused by the Choi and Cho duo. Training mode is activated for both Shin and Choi, creating a protective barrier to prevent major damage. Choi confirms the terms of the duel, stating he will keep his word. Cho finishes the activation of training mode, and the fight can begin. Meanwhile, Choi tries to intimidate Shin once again, warning he will show no mercy. They both receive the signal to start, and while Choi continues his speech trying to intimidate Shin, he notices something strange that catches him off guard. Shin had already started the battle with a devastating leap, taking Choi by surprise. Shin retorts as he attacks, saying he won't show mercy either. No matter how much Choi begs, there will be no forgiveness. Meanwhile, somewhere through a television, Miso watches the live broadcast.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, it really helps. And for more content like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see another part. I'd love to hear your thoughts. See you next time. Bye-bye.